Okay, so I think that works. Let me just check. Okay, that works. So welcome everybody. I'm Benita. I identify as a lesbian. I'm a scuba diving instructor. It drives a lot of my passion. I'm an environmentalist. I consider myself a Hong Konger, but also a global citizen. I have lived in Indonesia, Australia, and US before. The reason I want to show you this is I also want to introduce you to this concept. It's called identity map. So I don't know how many of you have done this. I think it's very fun. Unfortunately, because today is virtual, it's a bit hard for me to ask you to draw one. But if you have some time, I really encourage you to just draw out that part of yourself, whether it's your religion, your family, your sexuality, your friends, what identify you. So for example, like scuba diving is a very big part of me. So I don't know for you, is it cooking, gardening, or whatever that is. I think that identity map is very helpful for us to understand our privilege and our biases, which we will talk about, and how like this multiple identity overlap, which is the topic of today, is intersectionality. And by the way, you will also have a copy of the recording and the slides. So if you see anything that's interesting, you want to write down, don't worry about it. You will have all that. So a little bit about Encompass. I know some of you are new to us. We are a social enterprise. We do a lot of different programs, and all of them is related to the Sustainable Development Goal. So the picture you see here is it's an event called TEDx Encompass. We did it on climate change last year, a bilingual event. And I try to be as inclusive as our event is possible. So one of the example is 2 years ago on the International Women's Day. We have this event with bilingual talks, workshops. As you can see, there's some differently abled individuals who are performing. This is a very big masculine bodybuilder. Silfong is my gender fluid friend. And we also include like migrant workers and all that. And I try to have an intersectional approach in all my work. Sometimes I cannot do that, but I try to use that as most. And I do a lot of diversity and inclusion workshop, which you can check us out in our website. So today we will going to examine your privilege and biases, and we're going to do some short exercise. I'll explain what intersectionality is, and I will give you some suggestions on how to create a more inclusive world or how to be a better ally. So maybe I'll first do this, and I kind of like this. Yeah, I just want to have a quick poll of we have about I think 8 or 10 of us here, just to know about you. For example, the first question is, do you have more LGBT friends? More than 5. It doesn't mean that you are LGBT per se, but it may be showing your friend pool. The second question is, have you been mocked by your accent? It can be your Chinese, it can be your English, it can be whatever accent, and that could be a way of people discriminating you or microaggression. The third question is actually one of the questions I really like. Do the media consistently portray people like you and does so in a positive manner? Personally, as a lesbian, kind of tomboy, I think the Hong Kong media is not very good at portraying us. It sometimes portraying lesbian tomboy in a certain way, the way they act, the way they talk, and it's not very inclusive. But I think it's not only in Hong Kong. I think even in Hollywood, there's also a lot of misportrayal. And I guess some of you said maybe, and I'm not sure. And the fourth question is, have you ever tried to distance yourself from any of your identities? So we got a mix answer there, and we'll dig deeper on what those answer could be. So thanks everybody for participating. I hope you like this little icebreaker. And so let me first start with diversity. So intersectionality is very related to diversity and something really dear to my heart. And diversity is a broad concept. It refers to nationality, sexual orientation, religion, and all that. So it is any of this above. And even political view, that could be very diverse as well. And in Hong Kong, that can be a contentious topic right now. But other than that, we also obviously have very visible difference in diversity, whether it's your color of the skin or your age, kind of thing. So I don't know how many of you have seen this diagram. And maybe if you can leave it in your chat room. I know, for example, Brian also worked on this about your experience with we call it diversity, inclusion, and equity, DEI now in the community. So diversity is the quality of being different or unique at an individual or group level, and then inclusion is the act of bringing those together and harnesses differences in a way that is beneficial. So there's a famous phrase for that. Diversity is being asked to a party, where inclusion is being asked to dance. And then we have equity, which is the fair treatment, opportunity, and advancement while striving to identify and eliminate barriers. So I won't go very deep into this diagram, but just to put that out there. So I do want to talk about privilege, and I think that because intersectionality is very much related to privilege, each of us have different privilege and oppression. So for example, for myself, I identify as a lesbian, and sometimes I face discrimination because of that. But I also have a certain privilege because of my education background. I'm quite highly educated. I speak English quite well, and I think that bring up me certain privilege, and that help us to me to eliminate certain discrimination. So for example, I do a lot of talk on LGBT, and I always explain to people, I think in LGBT in Hong Kong is not only a sexual orientation issue, but also a class issue, because if you are working class, you face discrimination much more. So in a moment, we'll look at this privilege. So some of you might fit this box. Your privilege might be white, male, Christian, cisgender, meaning your gender identity and your gender expression is the same, able-bodied, heterosexual. So I do want to take a moment to learn about you as a group. So what we'll do now is we'll go to Mentimeter as a group. So if you can, take out your phone or your laptop. Come on. Okay. So what you need to do is to go to menti.com. You don't need to install the app or do anything. Just go to the website, and if you enter the enter the code, you will see this 4202987. So the first question is, and I know some of you are not from Hong Kong. If you don't feel comfortable in answer that, that's perfectly fine. But for those of us in Hong Kong, I do want to get your view whether, for example, Hong Kong is an inclusive place, whether there's enough awareness on diversity and inclusion in Hong Kong. And the third question is whether there's a good understanding of intersectionality in Hong Kong. So I see some answers coming in. So the code is 4202987. So it seems so far that there might be quite good awareness on diversity and inclusion in Hong Kong, but not so in intersectionality. And that is actually something that I really want to promote this year. I think in the D&I space in Hong Kong, there's definitely more discussion on that. And I also, I come out publicly on my LinkedIn a few months ago. I also suffer from mental health issue. I live with bipolar, and I want to use my identity as a lesbian and bipolar individual to further the discussion on intersectionality. And I think perhaps Brian can share more on that in the later part, some work we are doing on that. So maybe 5 more seconds for those who are trying to log in. The code is 4202987 again. Okay, so let me jump to the next slide. So the next question, do you identify with any of this marginalized identity? And maybe you don't fit in any of that, that's fine. For example, you are LGBT individual. You are differently able in whatever sense that you mean for that word, whether it's physical or mental disability. You have mental health condition, I do, or you don't think you have been any marginalized before for any of the identity. So we have one person who is seldom feel discriminated, and very good for you. And we'll look at those privilege very shortly. So it seems we have some race here. There's a non-white, non-ethnic Chinese, which in Hong Kong is an issue. If you are brown skin, you do tend to, or black skin, you do tend to face more discrimination. Okay, thank you for that. And now we'll look at those more detailedly. Next question. So is there any point in your life that you felt marginalized because of identity? So whatever that was in the last question or not in the last question, you feel that you have been discriminated because of who you are. So it seems as a group, we only have one lucky individual here who has not feel marginalized, and the rest is yes or maybe. So the last question required a little bit more typing, okay? So the last question, do you have any privilege? Some less obvious one, it could be your education, the language you speak, your sexuality, where you live, or your job, your profession. So one privilege I think we all have here as a group is we all speak English, and that's not a given in Hong Kong or where you live. So speaking English is one type of privilege, and maybe you want to take a moment to think about this question. Do we have any brave souls who want to share?
Hi, Benita.
Hi. You want to share?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Apart from my the discrimination that I've felt or I am experiencing, I am privileged to have good employers, and I am well educated. Well, you said that we are all speak English, and that I hold community organizations where I am a leader, and I established some what's this group, and I was able to tie up and have a privilege to be in a group of well established also and well whites, the color of the skin in Hong Kong. So maybe because of my affinity or my what do you call, my connections here, that sometimes that brings me a lot or have an edge to my co-Filipinos here in Hong Kong.
Can you share maybe in like 30 seconds, what do your community group do so the rest of us know?
We're having a clean up, the charity clean up, something like that. We clean Hong Kong trails because I'm also a trail race. I go trail racing, and I also have my family, my personal charity, which is the pen and paper, helping underprivileged back in the Philippines students or schools, the whole schools, and we're doing beach clean up, trail clean up, and I am also ambassadors of Pathfinders of EOC group. I found here or established the Filipino Nurses Association here in Hong Kong. So yeah, we're doing some talk and some charity
if you can
events.
if you can put it in the chat room, maybe about your group. So all of us, I would love to join you in your cleanup someday. I do a lot of cleanup as well, and I know a lot of migrant workers are really helping Hong Kong trails, and thank you for that, Lorna.
Sure. I love to. Thank you.
Yep. So thank you for the rest of you who shared your privilege. So it seems education and speaking English may be one of the theme. Some of them may be of a lighter skin color, or you are Caucasian. Also with that. So thank you for sharing that, everybody. And we'll go back to this later. So right now, let me go back to the talk itself. So I think we were discussing some of the identity, whether it's your sexuality, your class, your language, or your race. So I just want to put this out there, and when you draw the identity map, maybe you can think about this, like which identity you always identify with. Is it your race, or is it other thing? I will share this, like I think maybe 2-3 years ago, I'm not very comfortable to share that I am bipolar. I feel like that's something I want to hide because of my mental stigma. So that is not an identity I'm most close with. But I think in the last few months, as I'm doing this diversity work, I'm more comfortable in talking about that. So I think each of us with the different identity, and some of you said you live with a mental health condition, or you're differently abled, or of the color of the skin, there might be some identity that we feel less empowered than other. So I am sure some of you have heard these phrases in your life, whether it's saying that if somebody is so gay, or somebody is not normal. These are very common stereotypes on certain attributes of people, and it's a type of unconscious bias, very, very common. And like, how do we look at this at an intersectional approach? And I'll give you some suggestions at the end of today's talk. So intersectionality, where does this come from? This word, I think, has been around for around 20-30 years, but it has been used more frequently, I think, in the last few years. In the Golden Globe award ceremony, and you'll recognize some faces here, this woman used the word intersectionality to indicate solidarity across race and class. As you can see, there are women of different colors and age in this diagram. So what exactly is intersectionality? So intersectionality, if we're going to define this as a term, social identities, which is the different identity that we talk about, whether it's a religion, class, sexual orientation, whatever that is, that are interacting in a dynamic way. And it's really, you can see a quote by Kimberly Crenshaw here. We experience life, discrimination, and benefits, the privilege and discrimination based on the different identities we face. And I'll explain to you who Kimberly is in a moment. So basically, the term intersectionality comes because we don't have single issue struggle. So whether you are fighting for sexual orientation, you're fighting for racism, you're fighting for sexism, a lot of oppression is interrelated. And I think I think we all can see that, even in the news. Just last week, there's a shooting in Atlanta against women of color in US. So these are very real. It's not like an abstract concept. It happens in real life. So the term intersectionality is being coined by a feminist lawyer called Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. So what happened is, in 1989, there's a court case. There's 5 African-American women who sued GM on the basis of employment discrimination, specifically against Black women. However, the court weighed gender and race discrimination separately, because GM hired Black men, so there's no case for race discrimination. However, Kimberly argued that this issue of racism and sexism is actually interlinked, and you cannot look at this separately. So history of sexuality actually come before 1989. So 1989, there's a term for it. But actually, before, even in 1851, in one of this fiction about this Black woman in America, it's a long quote. I won't read it, but basically it illustrates that she is being discriminated because of her color and because she's a woman. So now I'm going to give you a very brief intro what this intersectionality concept is. We talk about some of the definition, and now there's a short comic explanation. So this is Bob. So Bob is a stripy blue triangle and should be proud. Bob is very happy as a blue striped triangle. However, some people don't like Bob. Okay, so they don't. Bob is facing oppression for being a triangle and for having stripes. So he has this identity problem for being triangle and stripes. There are different liberation groups here. For example, those for triangle and those for stripes. And if you want to make an analogy in real life, I will use the example LGBT and disability. So there are some LGBT disabled individuals out there, and there are groups that support LGBT. There are groups that support disability, but they actually don't talk to each other. The LGBT group and the disability group don't talk to each other. They actually compete for resources. They don't communicate. So Bob really wishes that triangle and stripes could work together, that people with different oppression can work together because oppression of one affects us all. Okay, there's no single issue oppression. So intersectionality basically is the belief that oppressions are interlinked and could not be solved alone. So whether you suffered discrimination because of your race, of your sexual orientation, of your disability, you are actually suffering from oppressions all the same. And this is basically the concept behind intersectionality. So yes, so the crossover effect of addressing the needs of the most marginalized, as you can see, people who are not rich or African American or diabetic, they might feel like different type of oppression. And I do want to crowdsource, and if you want to unmute yourself, please do. If anybody have some good examples of role models that maybe celebrities that whether they are politicians, whether they are singers, that have championed their position on intersectionality in their profiles or in their work. Or if you want to type in the chat room, that's also fine. I'm just curious if anybody have a good suggestions on that. Anybody have a favorite role model? Can I point on you, Brian, as my friend?
Well, Oprah Winfrey just comes straight to mind for me.
Yeah. Okay, so Tiff said Serena Williams as a Black female. Sure. Yep. Any male example, Brian? you are my role model. You are the reason I came out as a controller. So thank you for being my role model.
Yeah. Barry Obama would be another one.
Yep. Yep. And I guess. Yep.
I was interested that you mentioned diabetes. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and I have been since I was 11 years old, and every so often I follow various different posts and things, and some celebrity or something will get outed as a diabetic, and it's like it's never happened before. Diabetes has been around for a hell of a long time, and yet it's only through the internet and through the ways that these kind of identities are shared, and that you get to see that there are other people like you who are achieving despite, or in part because of disabilities or various different different abilities.
Yeah, I think most people may not think diabetes as I don't know, differently able in that way. Maybe as far as my understanding, so it's good. I think you share the example that there are some more people who are out because it does affect your daily life on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm well aware of the arguments about whether it should be considered a disability or not, but it's something that impacts on you 24/7, every day of your life. And so, but that's not necessarily something that goes above or beyond other types of disabilities. It just is what it is. It's
Yep.
something that impacts on your life.
Yeah, I think I have a similar example. I have quite a few male friends, and also my uncle, they also have gout. And I think gout also affect their daily life a lot about what they can eat and about their ability. So that's an example as well, I think. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Anybody else want to share their role model, or maybe whatever we have shared so far?
Back in the Philippines, the one also, there are so many gays and lesbians, international singers just like Charis Pimpenko, Isa Segura, and Boya Bonda is the gay. So they also sort of uplifting the marginalized LGBT community back in the Philippines.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I know there's quite a few Filipinos who are quite out as well. I wish there are more. Well, we do have some examples in Hong Kong. I think I don't know how many of you know Joyce Chang. She's a plus size singer, and she has been being seen as the symbol of LGBT like pride, like very friendly, and because she's very proud of her. She's very open about her body size, which is not seldom discussed in Hong Kong. Yeah, that's a good example as well. Anybody else want to share before I go on? I love today's group. It's very interactive. Some of my other webinars, people are not as willing to share. So please keep it up, and thanks for everybody. So I have just two examples here. They are Beyonce and RBG. So Beyonce is very well known, well outspoken Black woman, and very proud of her work. And I'm sure most of you have heard of RBG and her work in being like a woman leader and very outspoken as well. So these are not exclusive lists, and if you have more examples, please do share in the chat room. I think it will stimulate other people to think as well. So yeah, so basically, for example, this example of a working class woman of color, can her oppression and injustice face being explained by a working class, by being a woman, by being a man. So they are both, they feel injustice in different ways, and how does they intersect? So when we look, this is a slightly difficult diagram, but basically here, I know there's a lot of word in here, but basically there's a lot of different type of oppression. So we covered some of that just now, whether it's disability, diabetic, race, and all that. But there are some other less known discrimination, maybe being unattractive, maybe infertile is one. I don't know if some of you have thought about that. So basically here, the key message is that oppression exists in many forms and across many levels, and these different forms of oppression may interact and shape an individual's sense of power, resilience, and well-being. Yeah, and if when I share this slide with you, maybe along with your identity map, you can do an exercise. You can do a circle of the privilege and oppression you face, and I think it is quite good. And you can do it as a group. Maybe Lorna, you can do it with your friends. I think this will give you some insight on how oppression might work at a different level. Yeah. So I just want to reiterate the term oppression. I know one of you said you have not been marginalized with your identity, and that's great. But I'm sure, and that's great for you. I'm really happy for you. You never feel that. But I think for a lot of us, maybe we feel oppression because of a different identity and different level. And how do we actually empower people who are feeling oppressed, and what can we do? So oppression can come at different level. It can be individual, and we talk about unconscious bias and all that. It can be institutional as well. So I don't know which organization you work, whether it's university or at an organizational level, whether there are policies or perpetuate oppression. And I know some companies are now trying to have D&I friendly policies to promote that. It can be structural. So for example, one example is structural racism, and we can see it in many countries, whether it's in Australia or US. How does the racism affect, whether it's Black Lives Matters or different movement? Yeah. So this diagram is saying that if each road is a different race, gender, ethnicity, or different identity, and each car is a different tool of oppression, then when they hit you, the oppression hit together, you can't isolate which one is which one is a bigger factor. It's not a very simple statistic analysis. You can say, I feel oppression because I'm 40%, 40% of it is sexism, 20% of racism. It's a lot more difficult to analyze that. It's multiple factors affecting together. So a lot of words here, but basically the message here is that the power, the privilege that operate at a different level, and the power can be relational, that a person can simultaneously experience both privilege and oppression. So the idea of why and I think most of you agree that there's not enough intersectional dialogue in Hong Kong is how do this intersectional connection and uniqueness of lived experience affect people, and how do we not take a one-size-fits-all approach? Sorry, Brian, can I pick on you? I know you share with me a story about you as a white cisgender male, but you also is intersectional. So if you can share with us maybe 2 or 3 minutes about your experience with that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I've come from Belfast in Northern Ireland, so that was a kind of crazy place to grow up because that was in the middle of all the troubles. So I was quite keen to get out of there as soon as I could. So I went to university in England, and I just suffered a lot of, frankly, racist abuse and comments and Irish jokes and people making fun of my accent and calling me kind of names and stuff like that. So I'm super privileged. I mean, I was from a middle-class background. I went to Cambridge University, you know, highly educated, and you know, all sorts of privileges apart from being tall and, you know, fit and healthy and athletic and all the rest of it. You know, but that sort of Irishness part of it is something I've, you know, always felt quite ambivalent about because of those experiences that I had.
And how do you feel now talking about intersectionality in your work and daily life?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have experience of mental health issues as well, and like you, that's something, as you know, that I'm quite comfortable talking about, but only very recently. Well, it's actually it's only something that's affected me in the last couple of years. You know, so that. Yeah, so I can see that even as a white middle class, well-educated male, you know, guy, I have a huge amount of privilege, but you know, also I find myself in a couple of those minorities that do suffer stigma and discrimination.
And I think you told me the story about being a white male who doesn't like the boys drinking thing, right?
Well, actually, I was on having a Zoom call with a couple of my buddies who are both in quarantine on day 12 out of 21 today, so giving them a bit of moral support. But yeah, I mean, I don't, you know, I feel a lot more comfortable in female company, actually a lot of the time. When the guys get very laddish and want to go drinking and telling dirty jokes and all that, I get very uncomfortable. I just don't enjoy that. So it can make me feel quite excluded by that group.
Thank you for, I think tonight, I haven't looked at the list, but usually the people attending this talk are mostly female. So it's good to have a male perspective. So thanks for that, Brian.
You're welcome.
Yeah, okay. So I'll go on. Maybe we will have more time to share at the end. This is just a diagram. We talk about interpersonal structural racism, and obviously the sexism, classism can work at different levels. And just to show you more, like how does this interact at the mass media or at the institutional level. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term microaggression. Microaggression is conscious or unconscious behaviors or verbal statements that undermine another person based on their social identities. So here you can see some one of the thing is, say, do you speak English? So if you are a Chinese who are working in America, some people might say that based on this color of the skin. Or there's another doctor here who is brown skin, and he said, are there any doctors from America here? Assuming that if you are not white, then you are not actually a doctor. And looking at a female doctor and saying, nurse, can you find me a doctor? And having an age presumption. Unfortunately, I think microaggression are more common than we thought. And for me, at Encompass, I do some workshop on that. And I think I'm not saying that after the workshop, you will eliminate your microaggression, but I think raising awareness on how those microaggression can impact people will impact how you talk with other people. So an example is micro inequities. Micro inequities is similar to microaggression, meaning unintentional and subtle signs of discrimination that undervalue or demean people. So the diagram here you see is basically more women of color or people of color experience a higher impact of microaggression in the workplace. And this is a McKinsey report based mostly in US. But I think if you do something in Hong Kong or whether in Australia, it will be very similar. You get much more discrimination because just of the color or your sex, or being lesbian as well, as you can see here. And just want to show you some example of some studies of being the only one in the community. So on the left is Stacey Brown. She's the CEO of TaskRabbit. So there are not many prominent Black women in the technology industry. So she's one of them. And the man you see on the right, his name is Kunal from Sydney. He is an Indian gay man that come out to his parent, and it came as a shock. So when you have like this, like the only woman of color or the only gay man in the community, I think it really shakes what people believe. And this is another example. This is a Bentley University intersectionality report. And if you want to look at more on that in the workplace, I highly recommend you to look at that report. The report saying that being the only one, like the only woman or the only woman of color, it really increased anxiety, pressure, fear of making a mistake or confirming negative stereotypes. Women and people of color are less likely to also see promotion as equitable, or that all employees are judged equally. So there are some like statistics research out there that show the impact of intersectionality. This is another example, basically the same thing. If you are a person of color, if you're a person of woman of color, you suffer more emotional attacks at work. So I won't go into detail of this report, but it's out there. If you want to refer to it, please do. And this is another example. This is an example from a Culture Amp report. So you can see that straight white men are more likely to voice a contrary opinion without fear of negative consequences. Straight white men are more likely to feel that they have equal opportunity to succeed. Whereas if you are LGBT woman, you are more likely to feel like you're not being treated fairly. So how much of that is perception? How much of that is equal? I mean, that's up to debate. So and right now I'm going to talk a few Hong Kong examples. So for those who are not from Hong Kong, please bear with me for this few slides. So
could I just interrupt for a moment?
Yes, sure.
Sorry, I just in terms of what you were talking about before, the idea that being one of a minority that is asked to represent their group, like, you know, the people you've got on screen here being the only one, and therefore being called upon to be a spokesperson can be problematic as well. In terms of intersectionality, there's going to be a lot of perspectives, and once again, it's like you're being called upon to speak, but you can't represent every aspect of the different parts of who you are.
Yeah,
So
I totally agree. Like I think, I mean, like being the only like black woman, or like being Naomi Watts, like a biracial like athlete, and like everybody's like, oh, you're the spokesperson, and that it just like it just seems simplified that very complex experience into one person. Yeah.
yeah, and in some ways it's almost like a reason for going back and hiding away from being identified in the way you choose to be identified, because if you identify yourself, you're expected to speak for and about more things than what you maybe feel qualified for or able to do.
I totally agree. And anybody have a feedback on that? Or I think Raymond also asked a question. If Raymond, you want to unmute yourself, I think you raised hand just now. And thank you for that, Annabelle. Very good point. Raymond, do you want to ask a question, or you type in the chat room? Okay, maybe Raymond, maybe we leave to the end. I see that you haven't unmuted yourself, so maybe we will wait to the end to address your question. So I have a few more slides, and then we can open the floor to discussion. Yeah, I was going to share this. So if you in Hong Kong or even not in Hong Kong, if you want to look at more an academic approach on intersectionality, I really recommend work by my friend Pooja Kapai in Hong Kong U Law faculty. She does some really good work on intersectionality, whether it's migrant worker, whether it's race, whether it's gender-based violence, sexual minorities. I don't have time to go on the detail of the work, but if you want to check out some academic studies on the area, please check out Pooja Kabai's work. Another example I just want to share. This is a study done recently at Hong Kong U, and it looks at Hong Kong U students, which are quite multicultural, whether they are from mainland China, whether they are from overseas. Again, I won't go into detail, but basically the diagram here is saying that the intersectionality, because of where they are from, whether it's language, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's sexuality, it leads to different type of social exclusion. And I mean, for those of us in Hong Kong, you would know, for example, Hong Kong and mainland China students can have certain conflict because of where they're from, because of the language and different things, and that of course compound with other things, with sexuality or with different things. It can be quite complicated. So another example I do want to share is I am personally very fond of Resolve Foundation. I was their mentor. They are now also doing everyday action counts, a social equality toolkit to talk about race issues, sexism issue, and all that. For example, and Lorna, you probably might related this. This is another fellow they have talking about her intersectional identity as a migrant domestic worker in Hong Kong. So if you want to learn more about intersectional approach, Resolve Foundation at Hong Kong is also a very good resources to find videos, to find interviews about these individuals. So a few more slides to go. So I hope that after today and maybe you read more, you understand that individuals can have a very complex experience based on our different identity. and that intersectionality is a way for us to look at this complexity. A lot of words here, but this is a diagram I got from resources who talk about gender-based violence. But basically, I think it applies to all intersectional issues. So if you are working on racism, working on disability, working on multiple oppression, maybe you want to look at the social location of that person you're working with, what are their unique challenges, what are you as a service provider, if you are a trainer, a counselor, what can you do, what are some of your own privilege, which we look at today, to help to address them, and also what are the conditions that impact the social or economic conditions of the group that you're working with. So I think this is a resource from Canada, but I think it applies to everywhere we work with. And again, you have this slide, so don't worry about copying anything. Just a few more take-home message. I think to assess your own culture or your own biases, what are some root causes of those microaggression, of those unconscious bias, encourage and model intersectional viewpoints. So if people are telling you about oppression in one way, maybe you can encourage them to think about oppression in different ways and how some oppressions are similar, why maybe LGBT and disability or maybe race, they are different type of oppression, but also related. So maybe you can model that. Be a good intersectional ally. And I have a slide for that to illustrate what I mean. So first of all is knowing your privilege. And I think I did that just now in the Mentimeter. Some of you said because of your education, of your language, or where you're from. Because like the barriers you face, for example, if you're a middle class woman living in Australia, it's not same as like a queer woman living in Philippines. Okay, so maybe to understand like your privilege might work different way in different different places, and noting that your personal history may mean in some way that you have shared in a different way with different people. And checking your privilege isn't about creating a sliding scale of who's worse off, but it's about learning and understanding the views of other people who are feeling marginalized. Also, take time to listen and make space for other. The best way is to give a person full attention. Maybe and we said in the opening that is sometimes the media doesn't portray marginalized group very good. So give them space to talk about whether it's a podcast or a blog. Give space for people who might feeling be oppressed. And also listening is also helpful. And sometimes maybe you can't speak for those oppressed group, but maybe if you have a friend who are from this special group or whatever oppression they face, maybe you can share a Facebook post of what they share, or giving space for diverse voice in conversation. And one technique I do like is non-violent communication. I don't know how many of you have heard of that. It's a technique of listening, and I think that's quite helpful. You can Google that, of listening without judgment. And finally, is knowing the power of the words. And I do a lot of inclusive language training as well, like what words we can use to make sure people are feel included. Look at because your words can mean like microaggression or whatever way. You don't mean it that way, but it sounds that way. So I do want to use this moment, and maybe some of you can share what are some example of inclusive phrases you can think of that encourage like intersectional frame point. And please feel free to type in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself. I don't know, maybe Annabelle, you have some suggestions of how can we include people in the conversation so they feel welcome.
It's interesting because I am spurred to talk about my daughter, who's 11 years old. So she's a child. In order to get any support for any sort of emotional or psychological support, they will say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't take anyone under the age of 12 years old." And in terms of gender and identity, for my 11-year-old daughter, who prefers me not to call her my daughter, and it has nothing to do with sexuality. It has everything to do with her awareness of gender identity, and that how much language, how she feels it when people refer to her as she and girl, and all of those things. She's actually noticing this. They are actually noticing this, and I am struggling with the language myself, but I can see how significant it is to my child and a lot of my child's friends. And they're the next generation, and this is, I don't know how big it is in Hong Kong or with the Chinese language, how gender is actually referred to in Chinese, but I think it's a huge issue here, certainly in my life. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of the younger generation are more sensitive to pronouns now. So other than she, here, you can use they, or you can say I prefer not to disclose. And like the gender pronoun you use might not be the same with gender identity. Like, I don't know, in your daughter case, she just doesn't like to be labeled as she, but she's actually just, she says she could be a cisgender female. She's just not comfortable with the pronoun. She prefer another pronoun, or she prefer no pronoun at all. I think yeah, there are definitely quite some evolution in the area of how especially young people want to be identified. Yeah, I can see that also in Hong Kong as well. Definitely not only in Australia. Yeah. Anybody have a comment? It doesn't need to be inclusive phrases, but maybe Raymond. I don't know if and maybe I will also stop the recording here. So people are feeling more open to discuss. I just want to share with you one more slide, and you will get this. If you want to learn more about intersectionality, there's a podcast by Kimberly Crenshaw. She also done a TED Talk, and there's also a book called Woman, Race and Class by Angela Davis. Again, you have the slide, so don't worry about this. But maybe I'll stop the recording now, so people are more willing to share.